Okay, so this one is about privilege. And privilege is, I've done one on entitlement. And the one on entitlement is kind of from the perspective of, having a sense of entitlement, but then incorporating, the true power and meaning of the word itself. And I want to do something similar with privilege. And privilege and entitlement are kind of, cousins. They have similar meanings, but different implications, and I think we kind of get them mixed up. We talk about, you hear that phrase a lot at the moment about, especially the older generations looking at the younger generations coming through and thinking that they have a sense of entitlement, or they have a sense of privilege, or they need to check their privilege. And both of those things, I think, I just want to shed some light on them from my perspective, because they're both extremely potent words. And I think, my hope is that after this podcast episode, you've got more of a sense of reverence for the truth of privilege and entitlement. And, once you understand these things, my real hope is that you will look at your life in a completely different way. And I think this podcast may have the potential to have that impact on you. So I hope you do listen. So, privilege. Privilege, we often think of privilege as someone being granted some kind of immunity or exemption, or power. Often it can be utilized in context of having a right to discretion. This is privileged information, or someone's been granted the privilege to experience X, Y, Z. And, we think, when we think of the word privilege, it has the sense of, you can feel a sense of reverence within it. You've been granted a privilege to be able to go to the toilet, or or you've been granted the privilege to, it could be anything really. You've been granted the privilege to attend a party, or you've been granted the privilege to receive this money, or all these things. And that's what I love about the word privilege, is I feel privileged. I feel privileged. So here you have this word that has the sense of, appreciation imbued into it. I'm appreciative of having this privilege. And that says a lot about the power of that word, and that a privilege has been granted. Authority has been distributed to you, and you are the custodian of that authority, who is privileged to benefit from the entitlement. Now, I don't want to get into like real technical legal stuff, but it's really important to understand the difference. Because the two are very, very similar. So let's say, let's look at land, for example. Land is I often use land to talk about topics related to common law, because the law of the land is different to the law of property, because you can't, really own the land, because everything comes out of the land and goes back into it. So everything, all of the possessions that human beings have, they all come out of the earth, and they all end up back in the earth at some point of time. So you can't really own the land. So the law of the land works in terms of entitlements. And you've probably heard this before, back in the day, when they had the land grabs, and you see in the old movies where everyone's got their horses and they're all at the starting line, they're all sitting on a horse and they've got their flag, and then they say go, and everyone races to go and claim their stake. And so they're on the horse and they got their flag and they get to a piece of land that they want and they put the stake in the ground. And I love, with their flag, and they claim their plot. They claim their stake. And with those land grabs, that metaphor of the flag and the stake in the ground, we still have that today where, if you go to a piece of land, and you look at the land, there's a stake in the ground in the four corners marking the territory. And, when the way that the law of the land evolved was through deeds of entitlement. So you can't own that piece of the earth, but you can be granted an entitlement. And that entitlement is a deed of title. And it's in common law you have something similar where you have a trust deed, and that deed is really the asset of the trust, because it contains the privileges. And so you can see that a deed or a deed of title containing entitlements is a written record of the privileges that have been granted. And so let's say you're establishing a trust, a common law trust. Your approach to it is to say, okay, this is an asset that I have, or this is something that I am currently that I'm currently entitled to, and I'm distributing the authority, or some of the authority, to someone else to exercise the following privileges: privilege A, privilege B, privilege C, for the purpose of whatever that may be, to benefit from it in these specific ways. And we would call, typically in a trust, you have you have the trustees, who are the guardians of the deed, and then you have the beneficiaries, who are external third parties that the trust has been established to benefit and to serve. So, but you can see the privileges. A privilege is distributed authority. It's authority that has been distributed or delegated, for want of a better phrase. I don't really like using delegated because it infers a top-down kind of connotation, which in reality isn't true. If anything, the delegation of authority is a bottom-up thing, because the way nature does it is from the inside out. It delegates outward to enable expansion. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. The important thing is that the authority and the entitlement is in the possession of one person, and then privileges are granted that enable another third party to wield components of that power. So if you think of a baffle, something that baffles, actually, I don't know if that might confuse you. Anyway, if you think of a sound baffle, like in an exhaust pipe, it filters the sound so only certain frequencies come through, and it alters the tone of the sound. Same with a light baffle. If you have a light source and you put a baffle over it, it filters out specific frequencies to create a unique hue. And so it's the same with privileges. So when you delegate authority, a privilege can be considered the diffused or the filtered out elements of the delegating authority. So I am entitled to wield my power in this manner, and I am now choosing to grant privileges to wield this power to XYZ, so that they can benefit ABC, or so that they can whatever it may be. And so the mechanism for those privileges to be granted is an entitlement. Once you've been granted those privileges, the entitlement contains those privileges, and so you become entitled. So isn't that interesting? Because the subtlety of it, you've got privileges. They're not a right. And so when people say check your privilege, privilege is not a right. It is not a right. But if you have been granted privileges, you are entitled. You become entitled to receive those privileges, to appreciate those privileges. And I think this is the crux of it in society today, where people become envious of those who truly do have privileges and are not appreciating them, because those privileges, they have been granted those privileges, and they are entitled to appreciate those privileges. However, they don't seem to be appreciating those privileges as much as someone else who hasn't been granted those privileges could be appreciating them. And so the juxtaposition is that on one hand, you have people who have been granted privileges for the purpose of appreciating those privileges, and they don't appreciate those privileges. And here we have the phrase to take something for granted. And I don't know this for sure, but I would say, because of the evolution of words, how they evolved, to take something for granted, or what's granted? Privileges are granted. And so to take something for granted is to say that the privilege that I hold, that I'm entitled to, is granted. I'm entitled to it. And it's a catch-22. Yeah, you actually are entitled to it. You are entitled to it. And so a sense of entitlement is valid. If you have been granted privileges, in a formal way, you are entitled to those privileges. But the thing that goes against the aspect of this mechanism that goes against natural law, is that everything that is depreciating, or everything that is not appreciating, is depreciating. So if something's appreciating, it's expanding, it's thriving. If something is depreciating, it's in the process of decay. So one is in the process of living and expansion and creating wealth. The other is in a process of decay and atrophy and going back into the center of the earth to be decayed. Well, if it's something physical, that is. And so if there's a privilege that's been granted for the purpose of the custodian of those privileges to appreciate those privileges, what do we do if those privileges are not being appreciated? Should the authority that's granted those privileges revoke those privileges? Should they value them? and then make them available to those with the capability and capacity to appreciate those privileges. You see? And, it becomes contentious at this point because people say, oh, I pay my taxes, so I'm entitled. Or I live in a free world, so I'm entitled. But when push comes to shove, we have an authority that's been put in place by we the people to contain us, protect us, look after us, provide, act as an authority on our behalf, provide infrastructure that enables us to thrive and to, realize the latent potential of our own assets and of the assets of the earth. And we put it there. We put it there. We imbued it with authority to make decisions on our behalf. We granted that authority the privilege of, and the privilege that we granted the government. And it's important to distinguish this because it is the government that is privileged to wield our power. It's not the other way around, as confusing as that may seem. Government has been privileged by we the people to act on our behalf for our benefit. And so, but it has the part of that power is that it has the power to revoke any and all privileges that are subsequently granted back to us. So what we do is we imbue all of our authority and our power into this authority, and I literally mean all of it. It sounds far-fetched. It sounds far-fetched. And then this authority, to use the same terminology of baffling, to baffle something. So you've got total power and authority imbued into the government, and then that power is then baffled. So privileges are then filtered through and granted back to we the people. So we've got this loop where through common law, the law that applies to living, breathing human beings, your power resides within your body, your sovereignty resides within your body, because your word is your bond, and your word is spoken out of your body, and your word bonds you to the word of other human beings. That's how you contract. And so through common law, your word is your bond. Through your word, you imbue your authority into the government, which is a fictional entity. It's imaginary. It's a company. It's not something real or concrete. It's a fictional entity, and you give it total authority, and it then baffles that authority, filters it back down in the form of privileges that are granted, in a number of different ways using the law of statute, which is a legal framework developed specifically for fictional entities as opposed to living, breathing entities that are alive. And when that authority is baffled back through, filters back through, privileges are granted back to we the people and can be revoked at will by this authority, really. And that's how the mechanism works. So, you would think that the way that it's structured, that it kind of is set up to temper itself. But unfortunately, people, well, I don't know if it is unfortunate, but the reality is that people don't know. They don't know this is how it works. They think that the government has all the power, and that the government is granting them privileges, which is true, but they don't realize that those privileges, that the authority that the government has in the first place is surrendered by your parents at birth. So, your birth certificate is the initiating document that establishes a bond from common law into the law of statute. So, with your on your birth certificate, you'll notice that, like for me, my full name's written on my birth certificate in capital letters, and the reason for that is that you become capitalized. So you're under common law, my name's David of the family Ding, and how you would express it is you would say, I'm David, I am the one known as David of the family Ding. And in law, me, the living, breathing human person, the one known as David Ding, I am an agent on behalf of the legal person, David Ding capitalized. And David Ding capitalized is a legal person that only exists and is recognized within the law of statute. And so it's a very simple process. And that's what bonds you into, when you're a child, when your parents are legal guardians of you, then you are bonded into the system at that point, and you become a legal person under the law, which is not a real person. Very interesting system, and I think totally valid. I mean, very clever, because whoever thought of it, or however it evolved, and I don't know how it did evolve, understood that the people are the assets of a nation. They truly are the assets of a nation. And I think the only there are multiple reasons why this needs to evolve and shift and change now, is because, as a nation, that if that nation, it really does view its people as the assets, then the capability and the capacity of a nation to generate wealth is dependent upon realizing the latent potential of those assets, meaning, how can we appreciate these assets? Wealth generation is about an asset that appreciates over time, so that its value increases over time. Asset A plus X amount of time equals an asset that's even more valuable, and the difference between what it was worth and what it is worth in future is a surplus. That's what wealth is. It's the appreciation of an asset over time. So if we really, and so my hat's off to, the geniuses that came up with the system, seeing and understanding nature to such a degree that they knew that the human beings are the assets. And we knew that bonding those assets together to each other to form collaborative ventures like, companies is the way to realize the potential of those assets working together as one. And I think capitalism, if it was the obvious introduction into this world of imaginary entities like companies and legal persons. But I think where it fell short was just people don't understand this. We don't get taught it at school. You don't realize that you're an asset. The teachers that are teaching you don't realize you're an asset. They don't feel appreciated. They don't feel as though anyone's really helping them to activate or let alone realize their true potential. And so it's not, there's no narrative, there's no story about how we could be in the world. And, I think the psyche of the masses is really viewing everything from the perspective of a government granting them privileges, and without really understanding that it is the other way around. And so we can revoke the privilege of holding authority from the government, or if we wanted to, we could baffle that privilege to the government. So we can reclaim it ourselves and say, okay, well, my parents surrendered my authority to the authority that we call the government when I was born through this instrument. I'm now actually revoking that because I have the power to do that now. Here's a statutory declaration. I'm writing the statutory declaration as the one known as, whatever your name is, agent on behalf of the legal person that is the birth certificate. I hereby revoke this authority, and I'm now choosing to grant the following privileges to this authority. And you can baffle, though, rather than distributing all of your authority and just giving it all to the government, you can say, I would love you to take care of this and this, and in return I'm willing to contribute 10% of my income in perpetuity, or whatever it may be. And so there is a mechanism, there is an easy way for us to begin collaborating with this authority. And my firm belief is that the bond that we have to any form of authority, whether it be a massive one like the government of a nation, it's a personal thing. My needs, what I want from a centralized authority, may be different to what someone else wants from a centralized authority. And what I'm willing to contribute in the form of, rather than taxation, my capability and my capacity to contribute may be much greater than someone else's. And so I may want to contribute more. And, rather than be, this old school thing of, when I think of taxation, I always think of Robin Hood and the sheriff of Nottingham, going through the villages and knocking on the doors of the peasants' houses and demanding that they pay their taxes. None of them could afford it, but it's like just this blanket tax. And it's there's a better way to do it. There's a much better way. In a world within which we have some of the biggest companies on earth that are so sophisticated that they can avoid contributing to this authority in any way, shape or form, but they're consciously trying not to pay tax, rather than entering into a collaborative agreement with the authority and saying, listen, you guys are the experts at this and that, and I'd really appreciate protection in this way, shape or form. I'd really love to be able to depend on you guys to provide licensing and to provide regulation, or whatever it may be. And the list may be miles long, but when you think about everything that this authority, that our government does provide for us, and all of the departments that exists to keep them running, and all of the systems and the processes and the meetings that happen, and I mean, it's unbelievable how it all works. And I'm a firm believer that every human being is just doing the best that they can. And I'm not stupid enough to say that corruption doesn't exist, because I know it does, big time. And that people aren't trying to empire build or fight for power and all these kinds of things. I know that it does happen, that it does true, that it is true. But what I also know is that when people realize that authority is granted through privilege, and that privilege is granted by we the people to the government being the authority. I think once we realize that, it can start to become much more collaborative, much more collaborative. And those of you that listen to me frequently know that I've designed an entire system and framework to administer this structure of governance within a common law based organization that works in the real world for commercial ventures and non-commercial ventures, but utilizes an entirely new legal framework based on distributed authority, but also consolidated authority. Why there are so many scenarios where, in order for us to expand and evolve and become more and to thrive, we have to give someone else the responsibility to take care of something on our behalf. Whether it be our accountant or our lawyer or, a doctor or a hospital, a nurse, the bus driver, the taxi driver. We want to distribute our authority to the highest possible authority on the topic. That's our deepest desire, is for the highest authority on a specific topic that there is to wield that power on our behalf, because we are not equipped. And, in terms of evolution, our greatest opportunity to thrive exists within that mechanism of imbuing the authority to absolute experts on the topic, people who were uniquely gifted and whose nature has evolved to be the authority on that thing. But the missing component is identifying and recognizing each other's worth, recognizing our gifts, having the courage to reveal the aspects of our nature that are actually different to everyone else's, so that we can carve out that little niche for ourselves and claim our authority. It's our aberrance that makes us unique, that makes us powerful, that makes us valuable to the ecosystem we're all taking part in. And until we bare our soul to the entire world from the perspective of being willing to be judged, then we're never really going to realize that latent potential that lies within all of us. Every human being that's working in a job who resents that job and hates it are defying their own nature. They haven't really figured out what their latent potential is, what their true assets are, and they haven't figured out how to begin appreciating them. And the first step to appreciating them, or activating them, if you will, is to observe them, look at them, and see them. And if you're anything like me, someone who's been on this journey themselves, the hardest thing in the world is to actually look at them. You don't actually want to look at them because of what it means. For me to admit the truth of what my gifts are, it means that. It means that I'll lose all these friends. It means that these people think I'm weird. It means these people think I'm crazy. It means these people think I'm judging them. These people think that I think I'm less than them, or these people think I'm better than them, or these people are going to become envious. These people are going to, the list goes on, and it's so much easier to just play it small and just pretend that you're not as big and powerful and potent as you really are. And trust me, you are. You absolutely are. Every form of life has potency within it that is capable of so much more than is being realized right now. And as a society, we need to identify it and look at it and observe it. And, once the project I'm involved with, I'm so excited for when everyone's assets are going to be visible on a marketplace, sitting there as the dormant potential waiting to be activated and realized. Imagine a marketplace like Amazon, but all it's got is the latent potential of everyone. It's like looking into their DNA, and you see on this marketplace, it's rather than a business providing services, it's the asset of a human being, and the latent potential for that asset to form the building block of a collaborative venture that can meet the unmet need of some other aspect of the ecosystem. This is where our potency is. It's in our ability to bond ourselves to other assets, to other human beings, and for the fusion of those two things to create a third element that is unique to that collaboration, and then add another asset, and so that those bonds reconstitute themselves to form different bonds, something entirely new, and then another one, and then another one, and then this molecular structure that's composed of human beings forms, and it's collaborating, and it's perpetually reconstituting itself, disestablishing bonds so that new bonds can form. When instability impacts the system, exactly the same within molecular structures. When instability jumps into the system, it seeks that stability again. Sometimes the bonds repel each other, they have to be dissolved, and then they seek harmony again, and then they reconstitute themselves. They refuse to create something entirely new. This is the capability that human beings have to collaborate. This is the capability that nations have to collaborate. And I mean, look at the Ukraine and Russia. It's all over the news. And, I was sitting down with my parents today, and we were listening to what was going on, and we just looked at each other and just dumbfounded, just thinking, how do we get here? How is there a scenario right now on an earth that is literally a wealth generating machine, where there is a valid reason, there is a justifiable reason to kill people, to terrorize people, in order to gain control of something? What is, how? And the authority that we the people have imbued into the governments of these nations have they're meant to be the highest authorities in the land, the most onto it, switched on, intelligent, pragmatic people on the planet, for the purposes of governance and diplomacy and conflict resolution and mediation and justice and all these things. And that entity has decided to invade and terrorize another nation. And, this is partly why I wanted to talk about privilege today, because in a scenario, the potential for nations to approach these issues in a much different way exists. But here's what has to happen. And I'm just going to be blunt. Often I'm always just sharing my perspective from a position of, I'm neither for nor against. This is just my perspective. This is what I am seeing. But in this particular scenario, I just want to be blunt and say that if the human race is ever going to transcend things like war and massive conflict and intense suffering, we're going to have to be able to approach conflict from the perspective of being prepared to let go of our previous identity. Human beings have this quite often in their lives, an identity crisis. And all an identity crisis is a refusal to let go of who we believed we once were in order to become something entirely new. Maybe you lost a job and you had it for 20 years, and now you don't know who you are without it. It can even go to the point where you've had to live with pain for 20 years, chronic pain, and then it gets healed, and you don't know who you are without your pain. It's a very unusual phenomenon. We identify with so many different things, and we have no idea. We think that who we are is made up of things like our pain and the persona around someone in the workplace, and you see the same thing with nations. If you zoom out and look at the planet like it's just the size of a marble, you look at planet Earth like it's the size of a marble, then you zoom out again, you can see all the other planets, and then you zoom out and look at everything from the perspective of the sun, everything just orbiting around you. What does it matter? What is so important that we can't zoom back in and look at that conflict that's happening and say, how can we reconstitute ourselves? There is an obstacle that we cannot transcend. The opposing forces are so powerful that there's an obstacle that we cannot overcome. And in nature, what happens here is reconstitution. It reconstitutes itself. If the bonds between molecules, between atoms, become unstable, then it has to reconstitute itself in order to find harmony and stability again. And if let's say, look at water as an example of a molecule. Hydrogen atom, 2 oxygen atoms, a trinity of atoms collaborating together, constituted together. The water molecule is its constituents. Stay with me here. Its constituents are composed of a hydrogen atom, 2 oxygen atoms. Now, if they become unstable, what do? They seek harmony. But if they relinquish one of their bonds, if they want to find stability and harmony and peace, they have to be prepared to let go of identifying as water. If one of them is going to lose some electrons and then let go of its bond, and it's going to break the bond between all three, they have to be willing to let go of their former identity as water. So I am now just a hydrogen. Or I'm now, all of a sudden, my gravity is pulling me towards some other molecule, and I've now reconstituted myself to bond with that new molecule, and oh my God, I'm now something much, much greater. I'm now part of a molecule that's way beyond the complexity of a water molecule. That's this massive chain of uniqueness, complexity, diversity, interdependency, and it's created something spectacular, and I'm now a part of that. And so I now identify as that. You, as a human being, you are a base element of something that has the potential to be much, much greater. You will always be who you are, that individual that you are. but your job doesn't define you. And everything that you're bonded to that you're not prepared to let go of, the reality, and if there's disharmony in that situation, the reality is that if you're willing to allow that bond to dissolve or to weaken, the only thing that's waiting for you is an opportunity to reconstitute yourself with something else, and so that you can identify as something even greater than what you are now. The same goes for a nation, the Ukraine and Russia. I don't know about you, but I want authorities who are willing to relinquish what we once were in order to reconstitute ourselves into something new. In nature, anything that's seeking to annihilate, annihilation is the most drastic form of conflict that there is. If you imagine the Hadron Collider, it's trying to collide particles together at intense, violent velocities. It's trying to smash them together in the most violent form of conflict you can imagine, to create annihilation, to create an annihilation. Now, why? What for? An annihilation is seeking to take its antithesis, its opposing force, and take it as part of itself, so that they become one, so that they fuse together and become whole, become one. They become complete and stable. They were the most opposed forces that you could imagine. Matter and antimatter is seeking its antithesis out for the purpose of annihilating it, so that they can become one again and become whole and complete again. So annihilation is seeking oneness at its very essential nature. And so now you have Russia seeking to annihilate the Ukraine. Really, what this is calling for is it's saying we need to become one. We need to reconstitute ourselves into something different and entirely new. We were once known as Russia. We were once known as Ukraine. We are now known as whatever you want to call it. The great nation of whatever. You come up with a cool name. You crusher. You crusher, not bad. But you catch my drift. You become a chimera. You splice together, you reconstitute the base elements of what makes both of those nations great. And you allow it to become something entirely new as a unified whole. This is what's being called for here. How can we collaborate to create something entirely new that creates stability for everyone involved, that creates harmony for everyone involved, that creates a third element that didn't exist before, that takes us beyond where we both were before? This is how nature works. This is how it adapts and evolves. This is how it's perpetually trying to realize greater and greater potential through the perpetual creation of fragmentation and the immediate seeking to consolidate that fragmentation, to contain it within a unified whole where the individual elements, where the base elements are immutable, but they can bond and fuse together and reconstitute themselves into anything. This is the potential we have. This is the potential we have, but it starts at the base level. It starts at the base level. You can't plead to a government to do this. We have to begin learning how to do it ourselves at an individual level. We have to figure out how to trade utilizing this. We have to figure out how to collaborate with one another utilizing these methods. It has to come from the bottom up, because we granted the privilege to be the authority to the government that we believe has total power over us. It has to start from the bottom, because all of our power is distributed to this authority it originates within our body. And so the change has to begin with us. And, I know these things are much more complex than just, let's get together and reconstitute ourselves. I know that. But all I want to convey is the potential that does exist, and it can be achieved if we view conflict as an opportunity to come closer together, to annihilate one another, not in the sense of destroying each other, but in the sense of becoming one with our opposite, so that we can, this is what harmony means. It's not seeking to change the other elements in the ecosystem. It's seeking to find a stable state where they can coexist. It's not even about balance. It's about, there's 1 million of me and there's 10 of you. How can I become 2 million? How can you become 20? How can we collaborate? How can we reconstitute ourselves to create something entirely new? Cross-pollinate, whatever it may be. But this is the vision I have. This is the vision that drives everything that I'm doing. And it's only in recent times that I've felt comfortable even talking about it with people, because of how different it makes me look, because of how I always used to worry about how crazy it sounds, and that it makes me look like I'm anti-establishment and all these things, but I'm actually pro everything, is the truth of it. And my hope is that, in the Russia and the Ukraine, my hope is that, being honest about it and pragmatic, without being super, idealistic about it. My hope is that this conflict marks a moment in time where we begin to see a radical shift in the way that we deal with conflict, and that we approach the resolution of conflict, and that the perspectives of people all over the world begin to shift and to be seen and heard by people who are in positions of influence, to actually influence change within, these complexes right now. And, if this truly is about the ownership of resources, then, my hope is that technology comes through as quickly as possible to create alternatives, so that we can all individually get ourselves into a state of wealth generation, which means a state of abundance. And again, I know it's not going to happen overnight, but it is, this is what's possible right now. We have the capability. And man, given what's going on right now, do I have the will? I know many others do as well. So if you're having tough times out there, if you think there's no light at the end of the tunnel, if you can't see an end to your own suffering, if you feel like there's latent potential within you and you have no idea how to tap into it, how it's ever going to get out of your body, just start writing it down. Just get it out of your body in any way, shape or form. And just start to observe it. Just look at it. Just try and understand it. Just zoom out of yourself, look at who you are, look at the evolution of your ancestors and of your own life, and try and understand your uniqueness and what the utility of that may be, the untapped utility of what it may be. It could be a skill, and experience, wisdom, knowledge, absolutely anything. An idea. It could be the way your mind works. It could be the way your body moves. It could be absolutely anything. And just start to observe it so that it has the opportunity to begin appreciating, at least by you. So, privilege. Governments of nations are privileged to have the authority to speak and act on our behalf, make decisions on our behalf, protect us, keep us safe, help us to realize our dormant potential. And we have the power to revoke that privilege. Not that we'd want to. If we did it tomorrow, we'd be screwed. But what we do have the right to do is educate ourselves and become aware of the reality of how power works and how distributed authority works and how privileges are granted. And just let these authorities understand and know that we can revoke that privilege. And I believe install a system where we revoke that privilege and then we grant privileges to this authority again that are baffled, that are filtered, where they may not hold all of our authority, but maybe some of it in specialist areas, or most of it, or all of it in certain scenarios. So hopefully that's shed some light on the nature of privilege. And yeah, if you're one of these people that says to other people, check your privilege, you may want to check your own first. Okay, that's it for now for the nature of privilege. Cheers for now.